Hello, and welcome back to Haunted Drift Horror. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into haunted realms filled with pure horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. Back in 2017, I was sitting with some college friends, just talking about random things, when one of my classmates brought up her grandmother's house. The conversation had slowly drifted toward supernatural stuff, ghost stories, things people had experienced or heard about, and that's when she started telling us about this house she had grown up visiting. She mentioned casually, almost like it was just a normal fact about her life, that one of her aunts had died there. This aunt wasn't like other people. She had serious mental health problems, and because of that, she had the mind of a 6-year-old child, even as a grown woman. She was very overweight and had been dealing with diabetes and several other health issues for years. Eventually, her body just gave out, and she passed away inside that house. What my classmate told us next was the part that made everyone at the table go quiet. She said that sometimes, even after her aunt had been gone for years, she could still hear her walking around the house. Not just faint sounds that you could talk yourself out of, but actual footsteps moving through the halls. And then there was the laughing. Apparently, her aunt had a very specific kind of laugh. The kind that once you heard it, you would never confuse it with anyone else's. And that laugh, she told us, would sometimes just appear out of nowhere inside the house, coming from rooms where nobody was standing. Everyone listening to her that day said they believed her, but you could tell there was a layer of doubt underneath it. People nodded and said the right things, but nobody was fully sold on it, including me. Then she picked up her phone and started playing a video. She had recorded it herself inside the house, in one of the hallways. The hallway in the video was completely empty. There was nobody there, nothing moving, just an ordinary corridor inside a family home. But the sounds coming from that video were not ordinary at all. You could hear footsteps, clear and rhythmic, like someone walking slowly down that hall. And then came the laugh. It was exactly what she had described, a very unique and recognizable sound. And it was coming from a place where there was clearly no one standing. Everyone crowded around the phone, and the mood in the room shifted. People stopped being politely skeptical and started looking genuinely unsettled. For me personally, that video hit differently than anything I had ever seen online. I had watched plenty of ghost videos before, the kind that get shared around on social media or end up on YouTube channels dedicated to paranormal stuff. But those always felt distant. They were made by strangers, in places I had never been, involving people I had no connection to. This was different. This was someone I sat next to in class, someone I knew, and she was standing right in front of me telling me this had happened to her in real life. That closeness made it feel much more real and much more frightening. Even so, a part of my brain was still trying to find a way out of believing it. Maybe the audio was edited. Maybe there was some other explanation. Maybe it was just a strange trick of sound inside an old house. That's when she looked at me and said I could go see for myself. She offered to take me to the house so I could experience it firsthand. I didn't say yes right away. I sat with it for a few days, thinking it over, trying to decide whether I actually wanted to walk into a place that might genuinely be haunted. Eventually, I said yes, and we made a plan. When the day came, we went together. There were 4 of us inside the house that evening. I don't remember exactly how long we were there before anything happened, but it felt like a few hours of just waiting and talking and trying not to make the situation feel more dramatic than it already was. The house itself was the kind of place that has a certain weight to it, the kind of home that has been lived in for a long time and holds on to that somehow. Old furniture, familiar smells, the kind of quiet that only comes in houses that have seen a lot of years pass through them. And then it started. First came the footsteps. I heard them before I even processed what they were. They were coming from somewhere deeper in the house, from a hallway or a room where none of us were standing. Slow, deliberate steps, the kind that have a particular weight to them. All four of us stopped talking at the same time. Nobody said anything. We just listened. And then came the laughter. It was exactly what I had heard in the video. Exactly, there was no question about what it was or where it was coming from. It filled the space in that house for a few seconds and then faded out just as naturally as it had arrived, like someone had simply walked past and kept going. The fact that all four of us heard it at the same time was the thing that stayed with me the most. When you experience something strange alone, there's always a way to explain it away. Your mind fills in the gaps, tells you it was just your imagination, convinces you that you were tired or spooked, and that your senses played a trick on you. But when four people hear the same thing at the same moment, and all turn to look at each other with the same expression on their faces, that explanation stops working. There was no way all four of us were imagining the exact same sound at the exact same time. Whatever was happening in that house was real enough to reach every single person standing in it. But there was something else, something that nobody had warned me about. Every single time the footsteps and the laughter appeared, I noticed a smell in the air. It was sweet, almost floral, but not quite. A soft and unusual scent that seemed to come from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly as the sounds did. I found it strange that my classmate had never mentioned anything about a smell in all the time she had talked about her aunt's presence in the house. After we left, I brought it up, and she looked genuinely puzzled. She said she had never noticed anything like that. Maybe she and the rest of her family had simply been around it so long that they had stopped registering it. Or maybe it was something that only certain people could pick up on. I never found a satisfying answer to that part of it. Time passed the way it does, and life moved on. A couple of years after that visit, I found out that my classmate's grandmother had died. It was the kind of news that makes you pause for a moment, even when you didn't know the person well, because you understand what it means for the people who loved her. But then my classmate told me something that I've thought about many times since. She said that after her grandmother passed, the sounds stopped. The footsteps that used to move through that hallway, the laughter that used to come from empty rooms, all of it just went quiet. Her aunt hadn't been heard in the house since the night her grandmother left this world. When we talked about it with friends, trying to make sense of it the way people do when something doesn't fit into the neat boxes of everyday life, we landed on a thought that felt right, even if we couldn't prove it. Her aunt, with the mind of a 6-year-old child, had never fully understood that she had died. She didn't know she was gone. She just kept doing what she always did, walking through the house, laughing the way she always laughed, existing in that space the way she always had. And when her mother, the grandmother, finally passed away, she came for her. She found her daughter still wandering through those old familiar rooms and took her somewhere else. And after that, the house was just a house again. I've had very few experiences in my life that I would call genuinely supernatural. Most of the strange things that have happened to me over the years have had some kind of explanation attached to them, even if that explanation required a little stretching. But this one has always been different. It wasn't just something I felt or sensed on my own in a private moment of fear. It was something 4 people shared together. something that repeated itself, something that had a pattern and then an ending. That combination has always made it feel more real to me than anything else I've ever encountered. My classmate and I lost touch after she graduated and moved to a different state. We were close for a while, but life has a way of pulling people in different directions, and eventually the messages just stopped coming, and I stopped sending them too. I don't know where she is now or how she's doing, but I think about her sometimes, and I think about that house. The strange thing is, the house is still there. I pass by it sometimes when I'm in that part of town. It looks exactly the way it always did from the outside, quiet and ordinary. The kind of house you would walk past 100 times without ever giving it a second thought. But every single time I pass it, without fail, something rises up inside me. A chill that starts somewhere in my chest and moves outward. A sudden awareness, like the air around the house is still slightly different from the air everywhere else. I don't slow down when I pass it. I don't stop. But I always notice it, and I always feel it. And I don't think that feeling is ever going to go away completely. Some things just leave a mark on you. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that ruins your life or keeps you up every night. Just quietly, in the background, like a door that you know is there, even when you're not looking at it. That house is one of those things for me, and whatever was inside it during those years. Whatever it was that walked those halls and laughed in that distinctive way and filled the air with that sweet and unexplainable smell, it has stayed with me in its own quiet way ever since. Story 2. There are no names that matter anymore. You can call me whatever you want. The shadow on your ceiling, the creak in the hallway, the cold that wraps around your shoulders the second you flip off the bedroom light. I've thought about writing this down for a long time. I kept telling myself it was too personal, too close to something that couldn't be put into words. But tonight, I changed my mind. Tonight felt right, and honestly, it doesn't matter much either way. You won't do anything about it. Most of you won't even believe it. And the ones who do believe it, well, by the time that sinks in, it'll already be a little too late for believing to help. I didn't begin with killing. That part came later, and even then, it didn't feel like a beginning so much as a natural next step. I began with watching. That's where everything starts. If you're patient enough and quiet enough, and willing to sit still in the dark for hours at a time. Most people aren't. Most people are too loud inside their own heads to ever really be still. That's actually what made it so easy. The first person I watched was a young woman who lived in the building across from mine. Her name was Lena. She was 27 years old and worked in marketing, and every single night, without exception, she was in bed by 11:40. She had a routine the way some people have religion, something she held on to without thinking too hard about why. Before she turned the light off, she always read the same book, over and over. Orwell, 1984. I know that because I spent almost a full month sitting in the tree outside her window, watching the thin strip of light that leaked through the gap in her curtains. She had thick curtains, the kind meant to block everything out, but there was always that one strip. And in that strip, I learned to read her silhouette, the way her shoulders sat when she was deep in a chapter, the way her head tilted when she was getting close to sleep. And then the moment, the one I started watching for specifically, when she leaned back against the pillow and reached for the lamp switch. That was my signal, not to do anything, just to watch. I watched her breathing slow down. I watched her body go soft and heavy the way bodies do when the brain finally lets go. There's a window of time between when a person falls asleep and when they've fallen deeply enough that nothing short of something violent would wake them. That window is fascinating to me. People think what they're afraid of is the dark, but the dark is just a room with the lights off. What they're actually afraid of What they should be afraid of is that space between consciousness and deep sleep, when the brain has already started to shut down, but the body hasn't caught up yet. When you're vulnerable, in the most complete way a person can be vulnerable, and you don't even know it. I started going inside apartments after that. The first few times, I didn't go past the hallway. I'd push the door open, and you'd be amazed how many people don't bother locking every lock, especially the secondary ones, the ones that feel like extra steps at the end of a long day, and I'd just stand there, listening. The refrigerator hum, the radiator ticking. Sometimes a television left on in another room, voices floating through the walls. And somewhere close, 10 meters or less, another person breathing in the dark, their whole life continuing around them while they lay completely still and completely unaware. It's a feeling I don't have the right words for. Something between reverence and hunger. Then I started going closer. I would sit on the edge of the bed and just stay there. Sometimes I only watched. Sometimes I reached out and touched their hair, very gently, the way you'd touch something you didn't want to disturb. Once, a girl smiled in her sleep and said a name quietly, barely a breath, and something moved in my chest that I wasn't expecting. I sat very still and looked at her face, how open and soft it was, how completely trusting, and I thought about how she would never know. She would wake up in the morning and make coffee and scroll through her phone and go about her entire day, and she would never know how close she had come to not waking up at all. That thought stayed with me for a long time. The first actual killing wasn't planned. Though I'm not sure planned is the right word for what I do, because nothing I do is really accidental either. This was a man, maybe 30 or a little older, who lived by himself and had a habit of drinking beer alone in the evenings and watching television until 2 or 3 in the morning. I had already been in his apartment 3 times. I knew the layout of every room. I'd sat in the armchair at the foot of his bed and watched him sleep. He snored loudly, in a way that filled the whole room and made the air feel thick and irritating. On the 4th night, I was sitting there again, and something shifted. I felt a wave of irritation move through me that was almost physical, and before the feeling had even finished forming, I had already picked up the pillow from the other side of the bed. He woke up. Of course he did. His eyes went wide, and his hands came up immediately and grabbed at my wrists, and he was strong, stronger than I'd expected. But I was heavier, and I was calm, and I had already decided. That's the part that matters most, the decision. Once it's made, everything else is just time passing. He fought for 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then he stopped. The room went quiet in a way it hadn't been the entire time I'd been coming there. A real quiet, total and complete. I sat next to him for another hour after that. I touched his hair and told him it was all right, that he could sleep now, properly sleep, without anything bothering him. I felt genuinely sorry for him. He hadn't done anything to deserve it. He just snored too loudly on the wrong night. After that night, I understood something that I should probably have understood sooner. Everyone deserves something. I'm just the one who can see it clearly enough to act on it. Things are different now. I don't wait for people to fall asleep on their own anymore. I help them get there. I help them get to that deep, unreachable place where nothing can pull them back easily. You know that feeling some people describe, waking up suddenly in the middle of the night with a sensation of weight on their chest? Pressure. Like something is sitting on them and they can't move or breathe properly? That gets called sleep paralysis. Medical term, very clean, very reassuring. It's not sleep paralysis. That's me, I'm checking. Testing how deep you've gone, how ready you are, If you manage to pull yourself out of it, to open your eyes, to make your body respond, then tonight isn't your night. I'll leave. I'll go quietly. And I'll leave nothing behind except maybe a faint smell. Something metallic you can't quite place. And damp prints on the carpet you'll notice in the morning and spend 10 seconds thinking about before you decide it doesn't mean anything. But if you stay under, if your body stays heavy and your eyes stay closed and the weight on your chest doesn't move you, then I stay too. I know your apartment the way you know it. I know where the knives are in the kitchen. I know which drawer you've been putting your phone charger in because you can never remember which side of the bed it's supposed to be on. I know that when you feel something wrong in the dark, when you feel like the room isn't empty, you lie completely still and keep your eyes shut and tell yourself it's nothing. It's just the house settling. It's just a bad dream. It'll be gone if you don't look at it. You lie there and you convince yourself that opening your eyes will make it real, and that if you just wait long enough, the feeling will pass, and everything will be exactly as you left it. I know you do this because I've watched you do it. I've stood at the side of your bed while you did it. I've listened to your breathing change as you talked yourself back down. And you were right that it went away. It did. I left. But not every night. I'm writing this right now on someone else's phone. She's lying next to me. Her eyes are open and she's looking at the ceiling, and she's been doing that for about 40 minutes. She looks peaceful, honestly. She looks like she's thinking about something far away. I asked her not to blink, and she's doing her best. She was always good at following instructions, even at the end. Sometimes I let them see me. Not for the fear, not the way you might think. Just because it feels wrong, occasionally, to be the last thing in someone's life and be invisible. So sometimes I want them to know that I'm ordinary, that I look like someone they'd walk past on the subway and forget 30 seconds later. Jeans and a dark hoodie and a few days of stubble and a face that carries nothing unusual in it. That's the part that should frighten you more than anything else I've written here. Not the breaking in, not the sitting in the dark, not even the moment when I make the decision. The part that should keep you awake is that I look like nobody. I look like someone you've already forgotten today. I want to tell you one last thing before I put this phone down. I'm already there. Right now, while you're reading this, I'm close enough that you should be able to feel it. That slight movement of air against the back of your neck, that's my breath. That shift in the temperature of the room that you noticed a few minutes ago and filed away as nothing, that's me settling in. You've probably thought about checking the door twice since you started reading this. Maybe 3 times. Don't trouble yourself. I already checked it. It's locked. Everything is locked and quiet and still. If you turn your head slowly to the right, you might catch me. You might see me there in the dark at the edge of the room, and you'll see that I'm smiling. And it will be an ordinary, unremarkable smile, which is somehow the worst kind. And if you don't turn your head, if you decide it's nothing, if you close this and put down your phone and pull the blanket up a little higher and close your eyes, sleep well. I'm already on my way. Story 3. The gym was only one room, small and tired, and at night it felt even smaller. The air inside was thick with heat, old sweat, and the stale smell of rubber mats that had soaked up years of hard use and bad cleaning. That smell clung to everything. It sat on the benches, on the handles of the weight machines, on the mirrors that covered one wall and made the room look bigger than it really was. In truth, there was nothing impressive about the place. The treadmills were old. The free weights had chipped black coating. A few machines gave off little squeaks and clicks every time they moved. Past midnight, with most of the lights off in the shopping strip outside, the gym felt less like a business and more like a room someone had forgotten to tear down. The only sound in it was the steady, heavy rhythm of shoes striking a treadmill belt. Henry was the only person there. He was on the far treadmill near the mirror, moving with the stubborn focus of someone who had promised himself he would not leave early this time. His gray shirt had gone dark, with sweat between his shoulders and down his back. Damp strands of pale hair curled near his forehead and temples, and every few steps he had to blink sweat out of his eyes. He kept looking down at his shoes, mostly because it was easier than looking at himself in the mirror. The right shoe had a small hole near the front. Every time his foot lifted, a flash of white sock showed through. He had noticed it days ago. He had told himself he would buy a new pair last week, and then again the week before that, and somehow he still had not done it. That was the kind of thing his life had become lately. Small jobs left undone, small promises pushed to another day, all of them piling up quietly around him. He checked the time on his watch and blew out a long breath. Almost done. He was tired enough to stop, but not satisfied enough. He always wanted to end on one last hard push, as if those final minutes could make up for everything else he had not done right. He reached down, pressed the controls, and set the treadmill to full speed. The machine hummed louder, then gave a strained little whine as the belt picked up. Henry grabbed the side handles for balance while his legs fought to catch up. His breathing deepened. His chest burned. The whole room narrowed to the treadmill, the sound of his feet and the bright digital numbers crawling downward. Outside, the parking lot sat in a pool of weak orange light. One street light near the entrance buzzed softly and flickered every now and then. Too old or too neglected to do its job well. The rest of the lot was mostly dark. Near the curb sat Henry's faded red Jeep, the kind of older model that looked fun from a distance and worn out up close. The doors were off for the season, because Henry liked the open air when the weather was decent, though lately the nights had turned colder than he expected. A pair of black, fuzzy dice hung from the rearview mirror, swaying a little whenever the wind pushed through the empty frame where the doors should have been. At the base of the front right tire, something moved. Tiny black paws gripped the grooves of the rubber. A swollen
Faint
rat,
classical
round in the
violin
belly
music
and
echoing
slick with
through
grime,
corridors,
dragged
haunting
itself
and
up from the
atmospheric,
asphalt.
growing
For a second
louder
it hung
gradually.
there, its long body stretched across the tire, claws scraping softly. Then it climbed higher, squeezed through the open side of the Jeep, and dropped onto the floorboard. It disappeared beneath a pile of old clothes Henry had left there days before. Gym shorts, a hoodie, a towel he meant to take inside for washing but never did. The clothes shifted once, then went still. Inside, Henry finished his last minute and nearly stumbled when the treadmill slowed. He leaned forward with his hands on his thighs, breathing hard, sweat dripping from his chin to the belt below. His legs trembled with leftover effort. The room around him was quiet again, except for the low hum of machines and the soft ticking of the wall clock above the dumbbell rack. He wiped his face with the bottom of his shirt, collected his bag, and headed for the locker room at the back. His body felt heavy in that pleasant, used-up way that usually came after a hard workout. He wanted a hot shower, clean clothes, and his bed. The gym was open all night for members with key access, but almost nobody came this late. That was one of the reasons he liked it. No waiting, no conversations, no one watching. The locker room was even smaller than the gym itself. Steam quickly fogged the mirrors over the sinks, turning his own reflection into a pale shape with blurred edges. The shower water came out hotter than usual, and Henry stood under it longer than he planned. Heat flushed his skin red and loosened the tightness in his shoulders. He ran both hands back through his hair and felt several strands come loose between his fingers. He looked at them for a second, stuck wet to his skin, then rinsed them away. He had been shedding more than usual. Stress, he told himself. Lack of sleep. Too much coffee. Not enough real food. It was always something. The faucet near the sink gave a sharp squeal somewhere behind him. A second later, the shower sputtered. The steady rush of water broke into coughing bursts, then stopped altogether. Just like that, the room fell quiet. No pipes, no running water, only the slow drip from the showerhead dropping one bead at a time. Henry stood still for a moment with water sliding down his chest and back. He listened without meaning to. Drip, drip, his own breathing, nothing else. He reached for his towel, wrapped it around his waist, and used another to rub his hair dry. More loose strands stuck to his fingers. He frowned, tossed them into the sink, and bent down to dig through his bag for clean clothes. It was then, while the room was otherwise silent, that he heard it. Another breath. Not loud. Not close enough to be obvious. Just a rough, slow pull of air from somewhere in the room that did not belong to him. Henry froze with his hand halfway into his bag. He listened again. For a second there was nothing, and he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Then he heard it once more. A wet, rasping inhale, followed by a softer release. It was different from his own breathing in every way. His chest tightened. "Hello?" he called out. The word came out harsher than he intended, deeper, too, as if his throat had suddenly gone dry. He stared toward the open space between the lockers and the sinks, waiting for an answer. None came. The room held on to silence in a way that made it feel crowded instead of empty. Water dripped somewhere behind him. Steam slid in pale sheets across the mirror. That was all. Henry swallowed and told himself not to be stupid. He had come in late. The old building made noises. Pipes rattled. Vents groaned. Maybe someone had come in quietly while he was showering, though that made no sense. Members usually signed in at the front. He had not heard the main door. And who would stand there breathing without saying anything? He hated how fast his mind jumped to bad places when he was tired. He forced himself to move again. He dried off, pulled on his underwear and jeans, then a clean white t-shirt that clung a little to his damp skin. He laced up his old shoes, the one with the hole still grinning white at the toe, slung his gym bag over one shoulder, and stood still one more time to listen. Nothing. Feeling slightly foolish now, Henry pushed through the locker room doors and stepped back into the gym. The big room was still and empty. The machines stood in rows like patient shapes in the half-light. He walked to the wall near the entrance and reached for the old switch panel. The plastic was yellowed and rough under his fingers. He flicked off the interior lights for the whole place. Instantly, the room dropped into deep shadow, lit only by the orange streetlight outside. That weak glow spilled through the front windows and stretched long bars of light across the floor. Every machine turned into a black shape with sharp edges. Their shadows climbed the mirrored wall and bent in strange ways, crossing each other until it was hard to tell what was solid and what was only reflection. Then he heard the breathing again. This time, there was no way to explain it away. It was clearly there, rough and dragging, as if whatever made it had a throat full of water or blood or something thick enough to turn every breath into work. Henry stopped dead. His heart began to pound so hard it seemed to shake his hearing. He could not place the sound. 1 second, it seemed to come from the space between him and the exit. Then it was behind him. Then above him, near the ceiling tiles where the vent ran. He turned slowly, eyes straining against the dark, but he saw nothing except the outlines of treadmills, the curl bar rack, the the old elliptical in the corner, and his own faint shape reflected back at him in pieces. "Gym's closed, buddy," he said, trying for firm and getting something much weaker. "You gotta leave." The words landed flat. They sounded small in the room, almost silly. For a beat, there was only silence. Then came a thud. It was heavy and wet at the same time, as if something dense had dropped onto rubber flooring. Another thud followed. Closer, Henry jerked toward the light switch and slapped at it. Click, nothing. He hit it again. Click, still nothing. The lights stayed dead. He backed away until his shoulders pressed against the locker room door behind him. Thud, thud, the sound moved across the gym floor slowly, but with purpose. Then something else joined it. A faint click, like nails or claws touching metal. A tiny squeak, a dragging rasp of breath that seemed to fill the whole room. Henry felt the hair on the back of his neck rise all at once. His skin went cold. Every instinct in him screamed to run. But fear pinned him in place for one terrible second more. From the darkness just behind his right arm, something brushed his skin. It was light, almost gentle, like wet hair or thin fingers or the whisking tail of an animal. That was enough. Henry let out a sharp, broken scream and lunged forward into the dark. He ran blind between the machines, his bag banging against his side. A bench caught his shin so hard that a white burst of pain shot up his leg and nearly folded him, but he kept moving. He slammed into the front door, found the handle, and shoved it open with both hands. Cold night air crashed over him. He stumbled onto the sidewalk outside, sucking in breaths that hurt his throat. For a second, he almost kept running into the parking lot, but habit cut through panic. He reached into his bag with shaking hands, found his keys after fumbling twice, jammed the right one into the front lock, and turned it. The latch clicked. The gym was secure. The stupid, normal action of locking up felt unreal against the fear roaring through him. He stepped backward, 1 foot at a time, never taking his eyes off the dark glass doors. Inside, the gym looked even blacker now that he was outside in the streetlight. The mirrors reflected almost nothing. The machines were only broken pieces of shadow. Henry forced himself to look, to make sure no one was following him out. At first, he saw only the shapes of weights and benches and the faint outline of the locker room door at the back. Then, near that doorway, 2 eyes caught the orange light. They glistened for the briefest moment, low, wide apart, and fixed directly on him. Henry stopped breathing. The eyes did not blink. They did not move. Then, just as quickly, they were gone. Not faded. Gone, as if they had never been there. He backed away faster now, every nerve in his body expecting the glass to explode outward, expecting some shape to rush him from the dark. Nothing did. He reached his Jeep, yanked the doorless frame open out of old habit, threw himself behind the wheel, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, started, and he peeled out of the lot so hard the rear tires spat gravel. By the time he reached the road, he was doing 60. The town was quiet at that hour. Most of the stores were dark. Houses sat far back from the road with only porch lights showing. His headlights cut a bright path through the black, and beyond that path there was almost nothing. Just trees and empty stretches, and the occasional road sign flashing white as he passed. Henry gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. His breath came in fast bursts. He tried to force it slower. He had to think. Somebody had been in the gym. Maybe a homeless man. Maybe someone high. Maybe an animal. But animals did not stand in locker rooms breathing behind you. Animals did not watch from the dark with human patience. And what had touched his arm? He kept seeing those eyes near the locker room door, bright and still and too calm. He needed to call the police. With one hand on the wheel, he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen light made the inside of the Jeep look strange and pale. He unlocked it with clumsy fingers and hit the emergency call screen. He pressed 9. Then 1. His thumb hovered over the last number. From somewhere down by his feet came a quick skittering sound. Henry looked up at the road, then down toward the floorboard, then back up again. His heart lurched. The sound came again, sharper this time, claws scratching against plastic and old rubber mats. He lowered the phone a little and leaned away. A pair of small, black eyes stared up at him from the passenger side floor, shining in the light from his phone and the dashboard. The rat was bigger than any he had ever seen in real life, thick through the middle, its fur patchy and slick, its whiskers twitching. Its body moved with ugly speed. In one quick burst, it scrambled over the pile of clothes and rushed toward him across the center floor. Henry swore and jerked sideways. Pure reflex made him take one hand off the wheel and bat at the rat before it could climb his leg. That 1 second was enough. The Jeep drifted toward the shoulder. The tires hit the edge of the road. The whole vehicle wobbled violently. Henry grabbed for the wheel and stomped the brake. The Jeep screamed. Burning rubber filled the air so fast and so strong that it swallowed the smell of the cold night. The back end kicked sideways. Something popped with an explosive crack, one of the front tires blowing out under the sudden strain. After that, time broke apart into pieces. The Jeep skidded. The world outside his windows spun into streaks of black and silver. Metal groaned. Gravel hammered the undercarriage. Then the front end caught hard on the ditch, and the entire vehicle pitched forward. Henry felt himself lifted out of the seat as the Jeep rolled. The phone flew from his hand. His bag slammed into his shoulder. Something hard smashed into the side of his head. The fuzzy dice whipped wildly in front of him. Once, twice, then disappeared in a blur of spinning darkness. Because the doors were off, the world came into the cabin all at once. Cold air, dirt, broken glass, the smell of gas, the terrible weightless drop each time the Jeep tipped and turned again. He thought he heard himself yelling, but the sound was lost inside the crash. Then, everything stopped. For a while, there was no shape to anything, only darkness, pressure, and a ringing in his ears so loud it felt like a solid thing. He lay twisted against something hard, unsure which way was up. The seatbelt dug into him. His head throbbed in deep, hot pulses. Somewhere nearby, the engine clicked and hissed as it cooled or died. He tasted blood in his mouth. He tried to move, and pain answered from his leg, his ribs, his shoulder. He could not tell if he was upside down or on his side. The smell reached him next. Burning rubber first. Sharp, bitter, thick enough to taste. Then another sound slipped through the ringing in his ears. Breathing, slow, ragged, wet, not his own. Henry's eyes flew open wider. But the darkness around him barely changed. The dashboard lights were dead. Moonlight, if there was any, did not reach him where the Jeep had landed. He tried to draw in a quiet breath and failed. Panic shook through him. Somewhere close, inside the wreck with him or just outside it, that rough breathing continued. Inhale, dragging and deep. Exhale, soft and rotten. Something shifted in the dark. A tiny scrape, then another, like claws finding purchase. Henry tried to lift a hand, to undo the seatbelt, to call out, to do anything at all. But his body answered too slowly. His head swam. The smell of hot metal and ruined tires wrapped around him. He blinked into the black, straining for sight, straining for shape, and heard that breathing once more, near enough now that it seemed to brush the inside of his skull. After that, there was only darkness. Story 4. 8 months ago, if someone had told me that my entire life would be completely flipped upside down, I would have laughed right in their face. There is no way I would have believed it, not even for a second. But here I am now, and everything is different. Everything has changed in ways I never could have imagined, and I am not the same person I was before all of this started. Let me back up a little and tell you how it all began. My name is Jillian, but most people just call me Jay. I am 26 years old, and I work for a marketing agency. About a year ago, my company made a big announcement. They were planning to open a small branch out in Las Vegas. It was a huge deal, and everyone in the office was buzzing about it. A group of employees were selected and given the opportunity to relocate to Vegas to help get the new branch up and running. I was one of those employees. The offer came with a nice raise, which definitely sweetened the deal, and on top of that, the company set everyone up with temporary housing until we could find our own places and get settled in. I felt incredibly lucky. It did not take me long to find a decent apartment that did not completely drain my bank account, and I thought to myself that this was going to be the start of something amazing. The new office took some getting used to, though. There were only about 35 employees, give or take a few. And while that is not exactly a tiny operation, it was nothing compared to the 100+ people who worked back at the main office. Everything felt smaller and quieter. The energy was different. But after about 3 months, I started to feel more at home. I was getting to know my coworkers and learning the rhythm of the new place. I was making friends and exploring the city on the weekends. This move was an exciting new adventure, and I embraced it with open arms. I told myself I had made the right decision. I was proud of myself for taking the leap. But just as I was starting to settle into my new life and feel comfortable in my own skin again, a nightmare began. And I am not using that word lightly. I mean a real, living, breathing nightmare that has consumed every corner of my existence. Something has been watching me for months now. I say something because while it looks like a human person I know, deep in my bones that it is not human. There is something fundamentally wrong about it. Something that makes every cell in my body scream to run whenever it is near. I remember the first time I saw it. Well, I did not really see it. Not fully. The cubicle directly to the right of mine was empty that day because someone had called in sick. The coworker who sat in the cube to the right of the empty one got up from her desk and walked away. Immediately after she left, another shape appeared near her cubicle. From my peripheral vision, I could tell it kind of looked like someone peeking over the exterior wall of the cube and looking in. Just the head. Just the top part of a head, barely visible over the edge. I ignored it at first. I figured it was just someone from the office being funny, or maybe looking for the person who had just walked away. But I could not ignore the feeling that came with it. It felt like a hole was being stared into the side of my skull. That is the only way I can describe it. It was not just the feeling of being watched. It was the feeling of being studied, of being dissected with invisible eyes. The shape stayed right there in my peripheral vision, and it did not move. It just lingered. Finally, I worked up the nerve to turn my head and look at it directly. Nothing. There was nothing there. Just an empty cubicle and silence. This went on several times a week, for probably about a month. I would catch the outline of a head peeking over the tops of the other cubicles, but it was always in my peripheral vision. Always at a distance. Never so close that I could make out any real detail, but never so far away that I could just dismiss it as my imagination. It was always right there on the edge of my awareness. Hovering, lurking, like it wanted to be noticed, but not fully seen. Like it was testing me. Seeing how I would react. Seeing how far it could push before I snapped. I tried my best to ignore it. I really did. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was tired or stressed, or that my eyes were just playing tricks on me. Every time I felt brave enough to turn and face it head on, I was met with nothing but empty space. It was maddening. It made me question myself constantly. Was I really seeing something, or was my mind just falling apart in some quiet, invisible way? I did not have an answer, and that scared me almost as much as the thing itself. Then one day, there it was. Not hidden, not lurking in the corner of my eye. Right there. It was a quiet Friday at the office. A few people were out for the day, and others were working from home. The office was more empty than usual, and there was this heavy stillness in the air that made everything feel slightly off. At some point during the afternoon, that unwelcome familiar feeling crept over me again. That deep, nauseating sensation of being watched. It started at the back of my neck and spread outward like ice water pouring slowly down my spine. I lifted my eyes upward and away from my computer screen, fully expecting to see that shape enter my side vision the way it always did. But this time was different. This time, I did not have to turn my head. This time, it was right there in front of me. Looking directly at me from about 4 cubicles down were a pair of bulging, bloodshot eyes attached to a gray, wrinkled forehead. They were not just looking in my direction. They were looking directly at me, into me, through me. My gasp echoed across the mostly empty office space, and the sound of it startled me almost as much as the thing itself. I could only see from the eyes up. The rest of the face was hidden behind the cubicle wall. Whatever this thing was, it looked like a cracked-out version of Gollum, and honestly, that is being generous. The skin was gray and papery, and covered in deep creases like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The eyes were impossibly wide and round, and the red veins that ran through them looked like tiny rivers of blood spreading in every direction. My brain finally got the message through to my body. Blink, breathe, do something, anything. With one hard blink and one sharp inhale, it was gone, just like that. I scanned the top of every cubicle I could see from my seat. Nothing. It had vanished completely, like it had never been there at all. I spent the entire weekend trying to convince myself that the stress of the big move had me slightly disoriented. That was the explanation I clung to. The stress of relocating to a new city and starting fresh at a new office had simply thrown me off balance, and that was why I was having these small lapses in judgment. I repeated this to myself over and over like a prayer. Stress. That is all it is. Just stress. And for the next week, I did not see it again. There were no moments where I felt watched. No shapes in my peripheral. No bulging eyes staring at me from across the room. Things were completely normal. And I started to breathe again. I started to believe my own explanation. Maybe it really was just stress. Maybe it was over. But it was not over. It was not long before it happened again. I would feel the goosebumps tracing up my spine like tiny invisible fingers crawling along my vertebrae, and there it would be, peeking over a cubicle wall about 10 or so feet away. Those eyes bulging so intensely that they looked like they were pulsating, throbbing like at any moment they would eject themselves right out of their sockets and sprout little appendages and chase me across the office floor with their sticky yet dry bodies. That image haunted me. It still haunts me. It was not until about the 4th time I saw it that I noticed its hair. Scraggly, wiry clumps that stuck out in random directions like the thing had been electrocuted and left to rot. Every sighting was brief, but somehow still too long. Each one lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds stretched out and warped and felt like hours. Time moved differently when those eyes were on me. I did not share what was happening with any of my coworkers. I knew they would not believe me. They would say the move and the heavier workload were just overwhelming me. They would tell me to get some rest or take a few days off. They would look at me with that particular kind of pity that people reserve for those they think are losing their grip. And I could not tell my family and friends either. They would blame it on mental illness. I could already hear them saying things like they think I should get back on my medication, or that this is the age when my grandmother started seeing things. I could not handle that. I could not handle being dismissed or diagnosed by people who were not there and did not understand. So I stayed silent. I thought if I just kept quiet and did not give it any attention, it would all just go away on its own. I thought I could starve it by pretending it did not exist. About 3 months after the first real sighting of what I started calling the office creep, something changed. It started to change its appearance. It is like whatever this thing is wanted to look more human, so it started trying on the faces of other people. Like masks, like costumes it could slip on and off whenever it pleased. One day I looked up, and it had the face of my coworker Iris. Another day, it was wearing the face of a guy named Evan. There were even times when it wore the faces of coworkers I had seen around the office, but whose names I did not know. It cycled through them casually, almost playfully, like it was shopping for an identity. But even with all the duplicating, there was one thing that always stayed the same. The eyes. No matter whose face it chose to wear those bulging red bloodshot eyes, remained. They were like a signature, a brand, a reminder that no matter how human it tried to look, the thing behind the mask was something else entirely. Those eyes were still the same soul-sucking pits I had seen nearly every night in my sleep since this whole thing began. And here is the part that really started to unravel me. After it borrowed someone's face, that person changed. They were different. Something about them shifted in a way that was hard to pinpoint, but impossible to ignore. Iris was someone I had known before the move. She was warm and bright and always had a smile on her face and an interesting story to tell. She was the kind of person who made the office feel alive.
Faint classical violin music echoing through corridors, haunting and atmospheric, growing louder gradually.
She stopped telling stories. She kept to herself and barely spoke to anyone. Interactions with her felt hollow, empty, like she was just going through the motions of being a human without any of the actual feeling behind it. It was like someone had scooped out everything that made Iris who she was and left behind a shell that only looked like her. Evan was even worse. Sometimes he would just stand there and stare at you with this completely blank expression on his face. No recognition, no response, nothing behind the eyes at all. Then he would turn and walk away as if you had never spoken to him, as if you did not even exist. It was deeply unsettling. These were people I saw every single day, and now they felt like strangers. Worse than strangers. They felt like imitations, like copies of copies that had lost all their clarity. I did not know what this thing was doing to them. I did not know if it was taking something from them when it wore their faces, or if it was leaving something behind. All I knew was that they were not the same after, and that terrified me more than I can put into words. Every shift at the office became more stressful and more fear-inducing than the last. I dreaded going to work. I dreaded sitting at my desk and waiting for that feeling to creep over me. I dreaded looking up and seeing those eyes watching me from behind someone else's face. The office that had once felt like a fresh start now felt like a cage, a trap I walked into willingly every single morning. But I was able to find some peace after work and on the weekends when I was at home. My apartment became my sanctuary. Sleeping had become nearly impossible because of the nightmares. Every night I would close my eyes, and those bulging red eyes would be waiting for me in the dark. But even with the nightmares, I was able to carve out just enough peace in my safe space to keep me from going completely mad. My apartment was the one place where I did not feel watched. The one place where I could breathe. The one place where that thing could not reach me. That was until about a month ago. That was when everything got so much worse. I started seeing it outside of work. The first time was while I was out shopping. I was at a retail store, checking out some athletic clothes, just browsing through the racks and trying to enjoy a normal afternoon. Then, that deep chill worked its way from the top of my head to the very bottom of my feet. My heart dropped into my stomach, and it took every single thing in me not to burst into tears right there in the middle of the store. No, 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 it cannot be here. Please, God, no, I thought to myself. My hands started shaking, and my vision blurred slightly at the edges. I began rapidly blinking my eyes over and over, thinking maybe I could blink the fear away. On my last blink, I shut my eyes as tight as I possibly could and took a deep breath and looked up. Just one aisle over there it was. The office creep. Not in the office. Not hidden behind a cubicle wall. Standing right there in a retail store among the racks of clothes and fluorescent lights and normal, everyday people. And it was closer to me than it had ever been before. Before I could stop myself, I screamed. It was not a small scream or a gasp or a startled yelp. It was a bloody, guttural horror movie scream that ripped itself out of my chest and filled the entire store. Every single person in that store went silent. Every pair of eyes turned to look at me. I stood there, panicked and breathless, surrounded by strangers who were staring at me like I was the terrifying thing in the room. I looked around, desperately trying to find someone who had seen what I had seen. When I looked ahead again, it was gone. Just like always, vanished into thin air as if it had never existed. I did not wait around to explain myself. I ran. I ran out of that store with every pair of eyes still locked on me, and I made a beeline straight to my car. I got in and locked every single door, and then I broke down. I cried so hard my whole body shook. I was so scared, and I did not understand what was happening to me. Why was it there? Why had it followed me outside of the office? What did it want from me? The questions looped in my head with no answers, and the silence inside my locked car felt louder than my screaming had. After that day, I started seeing it everywhere. At the grocery store, at fast food restaurants, at the nail salon. Every single place I went, it would show up. Let me just say, I am no longer welcome at that nail salon after I screamed and ran out in the middle of a service with one hand still half done. The technicians were horrified, and the other customers looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. Maybe I have. I do not know anymore. Every single time I have seen the office creep outside of work, it has gotten a little bit closer than the time before. The distance between us is shrinking, and I can feel it closing in on me like the walls of a room that are slowly moving inward. Things are escalating, and they are escalating fast. 2 weeks ago, I saw it in my apartment for the first time. My apartment. The only safe space I had left. The one place in this entire city where I could exhale and let my guard down, even just a little. That was taken from me in an instant. I do not even have the words to describe what that felt like. It was like having the last door between you and something terrible ripped off its hinges. There was nowhere left to go, nowhere left to hide. I have not been to work since that night. The office has tried calling me multiple times. So have my friends and family. I sent a few short messages to let them know I am still alive. For now. That is all I could manage. I could not explain what was happening. I could not form the words, I could not make anyone understand something that I do not even understand myself. Last night I saw it at the foot of my bed, but this time was different from every other time. This time I saw the whole face, not just the forehead and the eyes peeking over a wall or a shelf, the entire face. And it was the most disgusting thing I have ever seen in my life. Its mouth was spread open wide, so wide it did not look natural. The lips were dark, almost black, and deeply cracked like dried-out leather that had been baking in the sun for decades. Behind those lips there was nothing but a pit of pure black. No teeth, no tongue, no throat, just darkness. Endless swallowing darkness that seemed to go on forever. The mouth creaked open slowly like the door to a 1,000-year-old crypt. The sound it made was a low grinding groan that I felt more than I heard. It vibrated through the mattress and up through my bones and settled somewhere deep in my chest, where it sat like a stone. Then, it spoke to me. For the first time in all these months, it spoke. But the voice that came out of that black pit of a mouth was not its own. It spoke to me in my cousin Jamie's voice. Clear and familiar and warm in a way that made the horror of it 1,000 times worse. "Jay, can you hear me? Do not be afraid. Soon it will all be over," she said. Those words hit me like a freight train. Tears began rolling down my face before I even realized I was crying. I closed my eyes and wiped them away with shaking hands, desperate for it to be gone when I opened them again. When I opened my eyes, it was still there, but it was no longer standing at the foot of the bed. It was on the bed now, right there on the mattress with me, inches away. I could see every crack in those dark lips. I could see every red vein pulsing in those horrible, bulging eyes. I could feel the cold radiating off of it, like standing next to an open freezer. I yanked the sheets over my head and I cried even harder. I cried so hard that I began to dry heave. My body convulsed and shook, and I could barely breathe between the sobs. I pressed my face into the pillow and I begged for it to stop. I begged for it to go away. I begged whatever higher power might be listening to make this end. The last time I had cried that hard was at Jamie's funeral. Jamie, who had been taken from us too soon. Jamie, whose voice this thing had stolen and used like a toy. Jamie, whose words it had twisted into something threatening disguised as comfort. Soon it will all be over. I do not know what that means. I do not know if it is a promise or a warning or a threat. All I know is that I am running out of places to go and running out of strength to keep going. Whatever this thing is, it is not done with me yet, and I am terrified of what comes next. Story 5. I was 8 years old when I met Flynn Rider. Well, at least that's what my kid brain believed. I'm not going to tell you his real name just yet, but it makes me feel better to call him Flynn, so that's what I'll do. The trip had been for my birthday, and honestly, everything I went through before stepping inside those towering gates was worth it. The long car ride that seemed to go on forever, that sicky feeling in my stomach that just wouldn't quit, the heat outside that felt like it was trying to cook us alive, and my mom yelling at me because I refused to put on sunscreen. All of it, every miserable second, was worth it the moment I stepped into Fantasyland with a chocolate milkshake in my sweaty little hands. The whipped cream on top was already melting down the sides of the cup, and that queasy feeling in my belly had twisted into pure excitement. I remember the air smelled like cotton candy and deep-fried everything, and I was so thrilled I couldn't even form words. Mom was right beside me, holding my hand tight, flipping through the park map while slurping on some rainbow-colored slushie. I was blowing raspberries at random people walking by when I spotted one of my favorite Disney princes standing across the walkway. I had seen Tangled a grand total of 13 times. 14 if you count the time I was sick with a fever and basically hallucinated the entire plot while watching it. Flynn was different from the other princes. He made me laugh all the way through the movie. That scene where he gets knocked out with the frying pan had me dying every single time, rewinding the Blu-ray over and over until my mom wanted to throw the remote at me. And there he was, right in front of me, looking exactly like he did in the movie. He had that longish brown hair swept to one side, a slightly hooked nose that clashed with his otherwise handsome face, and his signature leather satchel slung over a white shirt and blue jacket. I expected him to be chatting with the other kids who were running past him and shouting his name, but he wasn't paying attention to any of them. Instead, he was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, the sword he was supposed to wave around like in the movie just sticking out of his belt. He looked like he was scanning the crowd. Every kid who walked past seemed to catch his attention for a moment. He would stand a little straighter, and his frown would start to twist into a smile. But as soon as their parents showed up beside them, his shoulders would drop again, and he'd go back to searching. He was looking for something, I thought, and that made me wonder if maybe there was going to be some kind of show. Earlier that day, Mom had taken me to an under-the-sea interactive show, and it had been amazing. But the closer I got to Flynn, sneaking away from Mom just a little bit, I realized he wasn't putting on any kind of show. There was nothing set up around him, no stage, no other characters. But he was definitely searching for something in the crowd. I ducked behind a statue of Ariel and peeked around it, watching him. When I was sure his eyes had gone back to scanning the crowd, I stepped out a little and waved at him with a big grin on my face. There was no sign of Maximus or the frying pan or Rapunzel, but I was happy just to see him. I was waving my arms around like a total maniac when he finally spotted me, and something in his face changed. His eyes flickered back and forth again, searching, but this time he stood up straight and looked me dead in the eye. I grinned at him, and he smiled back and pulled out his sword, giving it a wave. Then he winked at me and, after a moment, gestured for me to come over. I hesitated at first. Mom always told me never to talk to strangers. But this was Flynn Rider. He wasn't a stranger. I knew him like I knew my own friends. Mom would totally understand me talking to a prince. I looked over my shoulder and saw her still chatting with her friend, and I was still in her line of sight, just like she always told me to be. So it would be fine. I skipped over and jumped right in front of him. I asked him if he was really Flynn Rider, and then I lowered my voice and told him I didn't like his real name. Eugene Fitzibert was the worst name in the history of mankind, as far as I was concerned. He just shrugged and said he guessed so. When my smile faded a little, he seemed to catch himself and rethink his answer. His expression twisted, and I could have sworn I saw real pain in his face. Pain he was trying desperately to hide. Still, he forced a grin and said, of course he was Flynn Rider. That was totally him. I folded my arms and told him his nose was bigger in the movie. He just said thanks. But his smile wasn't as big as it was supposed to be. He seemed distracted. His voice was different, too. He sounded younger, like my older cousin, who was in his last year of high school. But I wasn't going to complain. He had just confirmed he was Flynn Rider, and that was good enough for me. I waved my milkshake at him and asked if I could give him a hug because he was my favorite. Then I thought for a second and corrected myself because he was my favorite after Maximus. I expected him to roll his eyes and laugh like he always did in the movie. Flynn and Maximus had that love-hate thing going on, and it was one of my favorite parts. But instead of playing along, he just nodded and said, yeah, sure. Then he looked behind me and asked if I was with my parents. I told him my mommy was over there talking to her friend, and that she talks forever, and my daddy said he wants to divorce her for it. I was so excited that the words were just tumbling out of my mouth before I could think about them. He nodded and said, "Ah," and then he grabbed me kind of awkwardly and wrapped his arms around me in a hug. He smelled like crushed fall leaves and spicy oranges. I opened my mouth to tell him how much I loved the movie, but then his grip suddenly tightened and it got hard to breathe. My face was pressed against his shoulder, and those smells of fall leaves and oranges became suffocating. I tried to pull away. I tried to cry out, but he just held me tighter. Then he spoke, and his voice was completely different now. He didn't sound like a prince anymore. He sounded like a stranger. He told me he needed me to do something for him, and he knew it was scary. He said he knew I was scared, and he wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't desperate. He told me he wasn't like this, that he didn't just wake up that morning and decide to take a kid. His voice cracked, and he was breathing hard against my shoulder. I could feel something warm and wet soaking through the straps of my dress. He told me I was going to follow him away from the crowd and to forget about my mommy. Part of him wanted to let me go. I could feel it. But something was stopping him, something dark hanging over him like a shadow. There was something about the way he said it, about the sound of his voice that felt sincere. Or maybe I was just a naive 8-year-old who wanted to go on an adventure with a fictional prince. At that point, I couldn't see the real person behind the costume, the boy with no identity who was crying out for help. All I could see was pure fantasy. He told me to come with him and said that was all he was asking, and that he wasn't that scary. I could only squeak into the fabric of his shirt. He admitted that, okay, he was maybe slightly scary, and he didn't blame me for wanting to run. I whispered and asked if I could help him right there. He said there were too many cameras. I asked about my mommy. He said he would bring me back to her, that he just needed help defeating the evil queen or whatever. I whispered in a shriek, asking if she was back. He said, yeah, sure, Gotham was back. I corrected him and asked if he meant Gothel. He sighed and said yes, Gothel, and asked if I was going to help him or not. When I managed to nod, his grip on me loosened, and I was free. I was free of his suffocating hold, and I could have run. I could still hear my mom just a short distance away. But when I looked up at Flynn, at the look on his face that was bleeding with desperation and pain and emotions I couldn't even begin to understand at that age, I knew I had to go with him. The world looked different when I blinked and really took everything in. The colors seemed duller. The crowd was thinning out. And the smell in the air reminded me of expired milk. Flynn wasn't glowing in sunlight like he had been when I first spotted him. Now he seemed surrounded by a darkness I didn't understand. Like shadows were wrapping themselves around him. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, and the sky was getting darker. Flynn took my hand and started stepping backwards before breaking into a run. I stumbled along behind him, barely able to keep up. I gasped out and asked where we were going, twisting around to catch one last look at my mom. She was still standing there, completely oblivious, a smile on her face. Panic rushed through me. Would I ever see her again? I tripped over my untied shoes, but he just kept pulling me forward before I could bend down to tie my laces. He didn't answer my question the first time, and I managed to choke it out again when we finally slowed down. Flynn stopped suddenly. He was looking around, calculating where to go. His eyes snapped to a security camera, and he took a quick step back before yanking me behind one of the attractions. There was a sign that said closed, but Flynn kept going, pulling me past more signs telling us to turn back, and then helping me climb over a gate. When I hit the ground knees first, he pulled me to my feet. He looked at my scraped knee and frowned, but I could barely feel it. I told him it didn't hurt and tried to smile. His lips twitched into something that might have actually been a real Flynn Rider smile for just a second before settling back into his usual frown. He hissed something under his breath and looked at something behind me. He said, "Please, never make him do that again." Then another voice spoke, and my head snapped up. There she was, standing under the setting sun, with dull rays of light blurring around a halo of golden curls that were braided and tangled with blooming flowers, wearing a purple dress that pooled around her feet. Rapunzel, but like Flynn, she was different. Her smile didn't light up her whole face, and her eyes, instead of sparkling with excitement and joy, were dark and hollow. She had her hands on her hips. There were certain things I noticed about her that chipped away at the magic. Her dress looked too tight around her waist, and her expression was pinched and strained. She asked Flynn if he found a kid, and her blue eyes darted to me with what looked like hope. Flynn gave her a look that was nothing like the playful glares from the movie. It was the kind of look my mom gave my dad when he came home late with his assistant. He gestured at me and said obviously, then told her she didn't seem the least bit bothered that he had literally just snatched a child. She asked if anyone saw him. He said he didn't think so, but that it still didn't feel right taking a kid. Her eyes softened, and she told him it was for a purpose, that he knew they wouldn't be able to get out of there without me. I whispered and asked what they meant. I told them I thought I was supposed to be saving them from the evil witch. The princess knelt down and gently took my hands. She asked me my name. I ducked my head and said Emma. Her smile became a little more genuine then. At least she was trying. She said hello, Emma, and told me she knew I was scared and they wouldn't be doing this if there was another way, but there wasn't. She said they needed me to do something for them, and it wasn't going to be easy, but I was going to be brave. Flynn cut in and told her to stop sugarcoating it. When I looked up at him, his lips were twisted. His eyes, like hers, were dark, so dark I couldn't see through them. That brief glimpse of the real person I had gotten when he checked on my scraped knee was completely gone, and I was left staring at a stranger again. He pressed his fingers against his temples and told her he knew it was getting stronger, but she couldn't let go of who she was, of who they both were. He told her she wasn't a princess and to stop acting like one, because if she gave in to it, it would be easier for those people to take them. Then he held up his arm and yanked up his sleeve. His skin didn't look like mine. It looked like it was rippling, moving, like there was something underneath it. Something crawling. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Flynn looked like he was about to cry himself. He jabbed at his arm and told her to look, that it was already starting and he couldn't stop it. He said he could feel it draining away everything he was, and it was messed up. He asked if she thought he wanted to become some Disney prince. He said he couldn't even remember his own name anymore and had to keep reminding himself. And even then, it was hard. I watched the boy drop to his knees and put his head in his lap. He said he just wanted to go to college, to finish his senior year and see his aunt again, but he couldn't even remember what she looked like anymore. Everything was gone. He lifted his head and looked at Rapunzel, who was trembling. I had never seen Rapunzel look so scared, so completely hopeless. He asked her in a whisper if it wouldn't be nice to remember her mom, the mom she kept talking about, but could never picture no matter how hard she tried. He couldn't remember what she smelled like, what she looked like. He said they were losing that chance, day by day, hour by hour. Then he told her that was his long-winded way of saying she didn't have to keep up the act. He said I didn't need a pep talk full of rainbows and cotton candy. I needed reality. They had to tell me what was going on and what I needed to do, and then I had to do it. Because if they didn't, If they kept standing there like idiots playing make-believe, I was going to get the wrong idea. The princess shook her head and sighed. She let go of my hands, and her expression went hard. She whispered my name and told me I was going to help them. I shook my head. Flynn was scaring me. I told them I wanted my mommy. She whispered that I could go back to my mommy. They just needed me to do something extra special first. I peeked at Flynn, and he scowled. He said they didn't have time for this, that I was either going to help them or they would make me help them. Rapunzel shot him a sharp look and told him he was scaring me. He snapped back, asking if he was scaring me, and said good. Then asked how they were supposed to get out of this. I whispered and told him to stop swearing because I didn't like it when he swore. He opened his mouth to say something, but Rapunzel cut him off. She told him to calm down and said they still had a few days before they were emptied. I shrieked and asked what she meant by emptied. Flynn grabbed my milkshake and turned it upside down, pouring everything out onto the ground. He said, "Every drop, kid." I squeezed my eyes shut and asked what I had to do. Rapunzel straightened up and asked if I knew the It's a Small World ride. I nodded. Mom had promised we could ride it at the end of the day. Rapunzel bit her lip and told me they needed me to ride it, and not to worry because she could get me on super fast. Flynn nodded and said they needed me to jump out under the first tunnel. I said what, and started shaking my head, but he gently put his hands on my shoulders. He told me to listen. He said I was going to sit at the back of the ride. It was pretty late in the day, so there shouldn't be too many people, and it would be dark. Rapunzel would make sure my seatbelt was loose, and all I had to do was jump out at the first tunnel. He shook me so hard the world started spinning. He said it had to be the first tunnel. Did I understand? Inside the tunnel there was a sort of... He struggled for the right word, like a hole or something. Rapunzel jumped in and told me it was a big rabbit hole. She asked if I had seen Alice in Wonderland, and I nodded. She said it was just like that, a magical hole in the ground, and all I had to do was jump in. Flynn must have noticed the doubt on my face.
Faint classical violin music echoing through corridors,
scary,
haunting
like
and atmospheric, growing louder
Rapunzel
gradually.
shoved him hard. He quickly added that it would be fine because they pumped weird stuff into the air down there to keep kids from getting hurt, so instead of falling, I would fly, like fairy dust. He seemed to catch himself actually smiling for a moment, and then groaned, muttering that he couldn't believe he was talking like any of this was real. Rapunzel shoved him again and told me it was real. Fairy dust, she said. I would fly. They promised, and I did want to fly. I had wanted to fly ever since I watched Peter Pan. Then Rapunzel said here came the hard part. She stood up and started pacing, while Flynn dropped his head into his arms. She asked him how long they had. He said maybe 5 minutes, and that was if my mom hadn't already come looking for me. Rapunzel took a deep breath and told me to listen carefully. She came and stood right in front of me, and I looked up at her, and finally, cracks were starting to show in her appearance. Her makeup was running in the heat, and she had rolled up the sleeves of her dress. She told me I was going to land in a big room, and she made me promise that as soon as I landed, I would keep my eyes closed. She said I didn't need to see anything. All I had to do was take 2 steps forward and reach out, and I would feel a big red button, and I was going to press it. I frowned and asked why I couldn't look. I told her I didn't like the dark. The two of them looked at each other, and Rapunzel sighed. Flynn spoke up and said it was the spell. If I opened my eyes, the spell wouldn't work. Rapunzel raised an eyebrow at him and said she thought he didn't want to play fantasy. He shrugged and said she should try convincing a kid to keep her eyes shut without giving her nightmares. The princess nodded and repeated it for me. 2 big steps, keep my eyes shut extra tight, and press the button. I didn't need to see what was inside the room because there wasn't anything to see. But if I opened my eyes, the spell wouldn't work. I whispered that it was the spell on Mother Gothel, and my stomach fluttered with excitement. She said exactly. Then they could all go home, and I could go back to my mommy. There was a long pause, and I finally managed to ask the question that had been choking me since Flynn started yelling. I asked if someone was hurting them. A lump formed in my throat as the words came out. The princess held out her arm. Like Flynn's, something about it looked wrong. Too shiny. She told me it was okay and that I could touch it. I reached out and ran my fingers over her skin, and then I pulled my hand back with a little cry. Her arm didn't feel like mine or like my mom's. It was hard and smooth and cold, like metal. It felt like pressing my hand against the door of my mom's car on those mornings when I slapped it impatiently, waiting for her to unlock it. I tried again, and the further my fingers traveled past her elbow, the more normal her skin started to feel. When I looked at her, confused, the princess spoke, but her voice was choked. She said I could see she still had some patches of real skin left. Then her skin started to ripple and writhe, just like Flynn's had, something moving underneath what was supposed to be flesh, and I stumbled backwards. She pulled her sleeve down quickly and told me it was okay. She pointed to her ear and then pulled off her blonde wig, revealing dark hair tied back in a ponytail. It was surreal seeing Rapunzel with completely different hair, but the more she showed me of her real self, the calmer I felt. She touched her right ear, where some kind of device was attached, something I had never seen before. The little green light on it reminded me of my cousin's PlayStation. She told me that as long as I pressed that big red button, this thing wouldn't be able to hurt her anymore. I asked what it was and leaned closer to poke at it. Her eyes went dark, and she said it was Mother Gothel. Then she pointed at Flynn, and just like her, he was wearing a wig, too, covering dark red hair that was held down with something white and netted. She explained that Flynn had one, too. She called it a dark spell, a magic spell that wasn't making them feel very good, and once I pushed the off button, they would be free. Flynn spoke up and said they couldn't so much as whisper the word help or they'd get fried, and that was why they needed me. He poked at the flashing green light on his own ear. He said that was why he had been scanning the crowd for kids without parents. Kids were easier to convince. Then he looked at me and asked if I thought I could do it. I smiled even though my stomach was doing flips and told him yes, I wanted to save them from the evil witch. Rapunzel grabbed my hands again and told me to remember it like this. Jump off at the first tunnel. Rabbit hole. Fairy dust. I added the last part in a whisper. Big red button. When I recited it all back to her, she laughed and held up her hand for a high five. She called me Princess Emma and said we were doing this. Then a cry made me jump, and Rapunzel's smile disappeared instantly, replaced by a sound that barely made it past her lips. I remember her turning away from me, her fake golden hair whipping into my face. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Flynn hit the ground, his shaking hands clutching his head. She was already there, grabbing him, pulling him back up. She called his name and told him to stay with her. She held his face in her hands, and I stood there frozen, watching. It was just like the movie. Except in the movie, Flynn's eyes hadn't been rolling back in his head, showing nothing but white, with thin red lines of blood running down his face. He was crying through Rapunzel's frantic reassurances, his fingers clawing at his ears. He was gasping and saying in his head that he couldn't hold it back, that it hurt. Rapunzel spun around to face me, her skin pale as paper. She begged me to promise I could do it, that I could push that button. I managed to nod while I watched her drag the prince to his unsteady feet. His expression kept shifting back and forth between who he really was, the scowling boy who was always in a bad mood, and something else, something I recognized but didn't want to. It wasn't a good kind of recognition. It felt wrong and fake, that plastic grin that split his lips apart and made his eyes light up in a way that had nothing behind it. Rapunzel held his hand, and I knew just by looking at her face that she was prepared to put me in danger if it meant saving him. That was exactly what I would have expected from my favorite princess. But reality was starting to creep in, and I didn't like how it felt. She told him to stay there and asked if he had any jobs right then. He said, just walking around and winking at little brats. Then he clawed at his face and called her a name that wasn't Rapunzel. Maya, he said. He told her he couldn't do it, that they were inside his head. His voice came out as a broken wail, but I almost didn't register it because my mind was stuck on that new name. A name that suddenly seemed to fit the princess standing in front of me. She hissed back at him that he could do it. She cradled his face and called him a name, too. Roman, she told him it was 5 minutes, asked if he could hold on for just 5 minutes. He could only give her a sickly smile. Then he started talking about what would happen if he ended up like Charming, like Jasmine and Snow White. He said they took Snow today, and tomorrow it would be Aladdin and Eric, and then him. He said it started with the skin and the brain, and finally, something he didn't finish. She cut him off and said that wasn't going to happen. Then Rapunzel marched forward and grabbed me, telling me to come on. This time her grip was tight, but I held on and kept up. Flynn sank to the floor behind us. He asked her to grab his jacket. Rapunzel didn't even turn around. She said no, because I was going to press that button. She told him to stay there. He shouted after us that the jacket was red, that it had a Pikachu on the zipper, and asked if I knew what a Pikachu was. By the time we reached the It's a Small World ride, my stomach was doing somersaults. The line wasn't very long, and Rapunzel moved fast, pulling me through the entrance and helping me into my seat. I watched her trembling hands as she buckled me in. I whispered that Maya was her real name. The princess lifted her head and blinked at me when I said it. I could tell by her eyes that hearing that name made her happy. But her lips pressed together, and she shook her head. She told me they were just nicknames. Then she smoothed down my dress and asked me to tell her again what I needed to do. The ride rumbled underneath me, and up at the front, a group of kids squealed with excitement. I looked around, and it was dark, the water beneath me black and still. I clenched my hands into fists. I whispered the words. First tunnel, rabbit hole, fairy dust, big red button. She asked me what I was not going to do. I said, open my eyes. Rapunzel nodded and whispered that was right. When the ride started moving, I turned and waved at Rapunzel, but she didn't wave back. I can still see her face in my memory, pale and scared, lit up by the glow of animatronic dolls coming to life around her. When the song started playing, I focused on the princess's instructions and kept my eyes on the dark water below me. There were 2 attendants on the ride, but both of them were paying attention to the kids sitting up front. As the boat slowly drifted toward the first tunnel, and I was greeted by another wall of little dolls jerking to life in sharp, twitching movements, I grabbed at my seatbelt. The world around me was swallowed by darkness, only broken up by dim white light. And when the kids at the front started screaming with delight, I pulled my seatbelt apart and stood up. Everything was spinning, and my legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but somehow I managed to plant 1 foot on the side of the boat. Flynn had told me the ride ran close to the ledge, so I only needed to step off. With his words echoing in my head, I made sure the attendants weren't looking, and then stepped off the ride and onto solid ground. At first, I was completely off balance, and I thought for sure I was going to topple into the water, but I caught myself at the last second. The ride continued on without me, and I crouched down low, just like Rapunzel had told me to. Once the boat disappeared into the second tunnel, I started walking blindly along the ledge, scanning the ground for the hole. It was too dark. I couldn't see anything at all. I remember getting frustrated, stomping my feet, desperately searching for this magical rabbit hole, when suddenly the ground vanished beneath me. I cried out, but my scream was swallowed up as I plunged downward, my body slipping into nothing. Flynn and Rapunzel had promised me it would feel like flying, but it didn't feel anything like flying. All the breath left my body in one long scream, and I wasn't floating the way I thought I would be. I was cutting through the air at a speed my body could barely handle. They said it would take a while for me to land because of the fairy dust, but when I forced my eyes open, there was no sparkling fairy dust. There was just darkness. Pure, complete darkness. And then I hit something. Pain exploded through my entire body, and I had to bite down hard to keep from screaming again. Remembering what Rapunzel told me, I slapped my hands over my eyes before I could see anything. But I could sense something. It wasn't dark anymore. The endless blackness I had been falling through was being replaced by a harsh red glow that bled through the gaps between my fingers. Trying not to cry, I stood up with my hands still pressed tight over my face. My shoes were gone. I must have lost them when I landed. My bare feet were standing on something soft. When I took one shaky step forward, the ground underneath me changed. It wasn't soft anymore, like I had been walking on piles of fabric or something. Now there was something wet. I was standing in something warm and wet that pooled between my toes and stuck to the bottoms of my feet. I repeated Rapunzel's instructions in my head. 2 big steps. I took my first step, my breathing so shaky I thought I might pass out. Then I took my second step. This time my foot landed on something different, something cold and squishy. It felt strangely familiar, like earlier that day when I was holding my mom's hand. I reached out for the big red button, but my fingers grabbed at nothing but empty air. Panic hit me hard, and I stumbled backwards. But then I was standing on something else. This time it was sharp, and it crunched under my weight. I couldn't take it anymore. My eyes flew open on instinct, and my hands dropped away from my face. I choked on a cry. The full weight of what I was looking at didn't settle into my brain right away. I wasn't thinking about Flynn and Rapunzel's warnings. Instead, my eyes locked onto the source of the red light that had been leaking through my fingers. There was a machine in front of me, massive, towering over me like a monster. It had a wide, angular opening that looked like the jaw of a shark. I didn't look at what was inside the monster's mouth, not directly. Because in that moment, my brain simply wasn't capable of processing it. I wasn't really seeing the piles and piles of bodies that I had been walking on, stepping on, standing on. There was a conveyor belt built into the front of the machine, and I started moving toward it blindly when I caught sight of the big red button on a control panel covered with other strange buttons and switches. But then something else caught my eye. At the very top of the pile of bodies was something red. It didn't stand out to me because of the color. It stood out because of the strange little yellow figure connected to its zipper. Something warm crawled up my throat, but I couldn't make a sound. There was no exit that I could see, only the gaping mouth of that monstrous metal thing that had spit out all these people. Before I could stop myself, I scrambled onto the pile and reached for the red jacket. But as I got closer, I started to realize they weren't sleeping. They were broken, like dolls, some with heads and some without. The jacket, when I stretched out to grab it, was still attached to something. a body buried underneath layers of discarded parts. I was frozen there, my fingers still gripping the material of that jacket when the ground started to shake beneath me. The monster had woken up. But it didn't eat me. It was shaking and rattling and making this grinding sound, the same sound my mom's lawnmower made on Saturday mornings. The red light switched to green, and then the screaming started. It was deafening, a girl's voice, her cries so loud they rattled my skull. But it wasn't just her screams. That lawnmower sound kept going underneath it all, grinding and grinding. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound cut right through. When her screams finally died down and the shaking stopped, the light turned red again, and I risked a peek through my fingers. The conveyor belt was moving, and on it, sliding slowly out of the darkness, was a girl in a dress I recognized. Her screams had been replaced by a sweet, melodic voice I knew by heart. I had heard it so many times. I recognized her jet black hair, her skin white as snow. Her face was lit up in that eerie glow, and a wide smile was stretched across her lips. But something was wrong. The way she was standing, stiff and posed, her eyes drooping and bulging at the same time. She was frozen in position, her hands clasped neatly in front of her, with a shiny red apple balanced in her palms. She spoke in a voice that hitched and repeated. "Would you like an apple?" she said, her words stuttering and skipping like a scratched disc. Her legs, metallic and gleaming, trembled beneath her. Footsteps, a voice. Someone said great, she came out wrong. I couldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off Snow White, off her drooping eyes and that horrible wide grin. A strong pair of arms grabbed the princess and pulled her roughly off the conveyor belt. Then another voice shouted, asking who let a kid in down here. The words barely penetrated my ears. I was still staring at the princess, at her dead eyes and frozen smile. Then warm arms grabbed hold of me, and that was when I finally snapped out of it. I started screaming, and I didn't stop. I screamed while they cleaned me up. I screamed while they carried me out of the ride. I screamed while they placed me back into my sobbing mother's arms. I couldn't stop, couldn't calm down, even when Mom whispered into my hair that everything was okay. All I could think about were the bodies with pieces missing, piled up in that room. I told her and the park staff about Flynn and Rapunzel. I told them they were hurting, that they needed help, but everyone just laughed and told me I had a vivid imagination. I didn't stop screaming and fighting until a man with a smile that was way too wide for his face politely told us to leave and handed us free smoothies. Still, I didn't stop. Nobody would believe me, and it was eating me alive that I hadn't been able to press that red button. Since that day, I have been through 12 therapists, and I have bitten 3 of them. No matter what I say, I'm told it wasn't real, that I had somehow jumped off the It's a Small World ride and gone exploring, and my 8-year-old brain built a fantasy world around whatever I saw down there. When I was 13, I asked my mom to take me back to Disney for my birthday, but she refused and took me to the movies instead. I spent my entire childhood trying and failing to get back into that park, and when I turned 15 and made a plan to go with some friends, Mom let it slip that I had been officially uninvited from the park because of the incident when I was 8. But that didn't stop me. I waited until my mom could no longer make my decisions for me, and I went back 3 days ago. I changed the name on my ticket and used a fake ID. I honestly didn't think it would work, but somehow I got through the gates. On July 20th, 2022, I went back, 10 years later. The park had changed, sure, but I knew exactly where I was going. First tunnel, rabbit hole, fairy dust, red button. I use those words as a mantra now. a lifeline for those moments when I can't breathe and the panic takes over. I was muttering them under my breath as I headed straight for It's a Small World. The ride looked completely different from the one I remembered. It must have gone through multiple renovations over the years, and that realization made my chest tighten. If the ride had been rebuilt, how was I supposed to get back down there? To my complete dismay, it was closed. There was a guard standing outside, and I walked right up to him, going over the mantra in my head. First tunnel, rabbit hole, fairy dust, red button. I told him I needed to get in there. He gave me a strange look, and I quickly said I just wanted to see the ride itself, not actually ride it. He rolled his eyes and told me the ride was closed due to a malfunction and would be back up in a few hours. I tried to push, but he cut me off and said it was dark in there anyway and I wouldn't be able to see anything. I held my breath and told him it was for a project, that I needed photos. He said the ride was closed, flat and final. I nodded, a cold sliver of dread curling through my gut, and said thanks. I turned around, nearly gagging on the smell of cotton candy and deep-fried everything. The same smells from 10 years ago. I stood there for a moment, lost, and then turned back to the guard. I asked him if he knew where I could meet Flynn Rider and Rapunzel. He raised an eyebrow and asked if I wasn't a little old for that. I told him it was for a friend. His lip twitched, and he pointed me in a direction and said the Tangled characters were over there. I ended up at a calf whose name I can't remember. I had searched everywhere for Flynn and Rapunzel, but they were nowhere. I spotted Moana chatting with a bunch of little kids, and Ariel and Eric walking hand in hand through the crowd. I couldn't bring myself to look at any of them. I could feel myself starting to fall apart. I had spent so many years trying to get back into this park, and now that I was finally here, I felt like I was going to throw up. I was sitting at a bench, staring at nothing, when the seat wobbled and someone sat down across from me. He held out a cartoon sketch in black and white and said they still couldn't get his nose right. I can't describe what I felt in that moment. It was a mixture of pain and regret and joy at finally seeing him again. It was Flynn. He looked exactly the same, hadn't aged a single day. It was him, and yet it also wasn't, because he wasn't scowling at me or yelling in my face. That spark, the one that had scared me as a kid, and the one I had been desperately searching for as an adult, just wasn't there. He introduced himself with a rehearsed grin and said his name was Flynn Rider, crook by day, dashing young gentleman by night. I took a deep breath and told him I was late. I barely managed to get the words out through a sob I couldn't hold back. I looked him in the eye, but he was looking right through me. It hurt more than I ever expected. This stranger I didn't even really know, this person I had tried to save, it hurt so much that he wasn't seeing me. His expression was locked in a cartoonish grin, and I thought back to Snow White on the conveyor belt, her frozen smile, her dead, staring eyes. I whispered that it had been 10 years, but I couldn't come back. They wouldn't let me. He just said hi again, same as before, same exact words. He told me his name was Flynn Rider and asked what I would like to do today, rattling off something about a variety of activities for kids and adults. Then he jumped to his feet, still grinning that grin, and told me if I needed any help to just come and talk to him. He winked, and when I looked closely, his facial movements were mechanical, his right eye winking on a timer. He added that he didn't bite, but Maximus did. Then a voice behind me called out his other name. Eugene. I couldn't breathe. Princess Rapunzel was standing over us, giggling. She told him to be nice to Maximus. He rolled his eyes at me and shot a grin at her and said they got along. Sort of, kind of, almost never. Rapunzel's gaze found mine, and there was warmth there, but it was fake. Manufactured. nothing like what I remembered. The sincerity that had lived behind those hollow, desperate eyes. She asked me the same thing Flynn had, word for word, what I would like to do today. A variety of things fit for both kids and adults. They were saying the same thing over and over, and I couldn't stand it. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I know I went back to the It's a Small World ride. I know I was screaming at the top of my lungs, slamming my hands into the metal gates. There was nobody around, but it didn't matter, because within minutes, I was grabbed and escorted out of the park. They gave me a bottle of water, and when I choked out my name through hysterical sobs, their expressions changed. They told me to go home. They said if I set foot in there again, they would call the police. I stayed outside the gate for a while after that. At first, my mind was racing with plans to get back in, schemes and ideas tumbling over each other. But slowly, like cold water being poured over my head, the reality settled in that I was too late. 10 years too late. I stood up and turned to leave. I grabbed my bag from the ground and slung it over my shoulder, and I started walking. But I stopped. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and my stomach twisted into tight knots. I turned around slowly, and there was a figure standing at the gates. I could see fingers wrapped around the steel bars, gripping them so tight the knuckles were white. Flynn, his right eye was still twitching, winking erratically on its broken timer, and a sad little smile kept trying to form on lips that were fighting to stretch into that programmed grin. I moved closer, barely breathing. Flynn opened his mouth. He said, "It's a small world." Then again, it's a small world, isn't it? I started to answer him, started to say something, anything, but that same guard was coming toward me, shouting at me to go home and yelling something about Disney adults. When I looked back at the gate, Flynn was gone. I got a restraining order in the mail this morning. But it's not going to stop me. I might be 10 years late, but I believe I can still get in there. I can still save them.